Okay, guys, as always, welcome and thank you for being here and giving me your time. We are getting down to business today. We are all well aware that Meghan has a propensity to lie. We know that she weaves a fairy tale, a story around her life in which she is the princess or the victim. We know that she overestimates her own intelligence and therefore makes mistakes in her narrative. We know that she plagiarizes other people's work. These things are facts and we can prove it. We, as creators, as well as the media, have archives from which we can pull proof that she had lied about many things. We have the proof that she had been factually incorrect a number of times, and we have the proof that she plagiarized other people's work a number of times. None of this can be disputed by anyone, be they sugars or people who do not like Meghan, and neither can it be disputed by the royal family, their aides, or Meghan's PR. It just is what it is. What is becoming a huge issue, particularly because Meghan, Harry, and members of the royal family had spoken out about misinformation at one time or another, are the things they are not being truthful about. Now, we, as the adults in the room, have to separate the bullshit from what matters, because the small things are the things distracting us from the real and serious issues. Now, what are the serious issues? For me, I do not care whether Meghan was born in 79 or 81, or whether she was born Rachel Meghan or Rachel Meghan or Rachel Megan. But if she used false information, her marriage certificate may be null and void, unless, of course, she legally changed it. It does not matter to me whether she was married once or twice before Harry, except to prove once again that she is a liar, and we know that already. What does matter to me, as a Commonwealth citizen and with family in the United Kingdom and also other Commonwealth and Crown countries, is how Meghan's lies and actions affect the monarchy. And one way it affects the monarchy is via its line of succession. We heard that Meghan made remarks that they are a plane crash away from the throne. Whether that remark was made by Meghan or not is totally irrelevant. What is relevant is that it is actually true. Whether it is a plane crash or COVID or a terrorist attack, in today's world, anything is possible. And this is not negativity, it is fact. William's children are still young, all under the age of 10, and should anything happen to Charles and William, a regent will have to be appointed until George turns 21. Whether we like it or not, Harry is the next in line of succession over the age of 21. Yes, the government can appoint someone else as regent. Anyone from other senior members of the royal family, like Anne or Edward, or even George's mother, Catherine. But if they don't, and just allow the rules of succession to prevail, Britain will have a king regent. Harry sucks at it. That is fact, and that is reality. But equally relevant is the fact that with the demise of any of the first five in the line of succession is that Archie and Lilibet will move up in the line of succession. Now, some of you may think that the rules laid out for the royal family may be outdated, etc. But many of the rules were added during the ages to protect the monarchy, and the rule that a child had to be born from the body was one of those implemented to protect the royal family after incidents of children being swapped or killed if born with a birth defect or in an attempt to infiltrate the bloodline, etc., etc., and so forth. For many years, it was the custom to have the birth of a child who will be in the line of succession witnessed by government officials. And this was done mainly because the births took place at home. Since women started going to a hospital to give birth, the doctors and obstetricians approved by the royal family were witnesses of the births and would sign the birth announcement and certificates. Diana had royal doctors. Well, we call them royal doctors for ease of reference, but they are basically top notch doctors and specialists chosen to attend to the royals because of their skills, their education, and reputation. But of course, most of them have a high end practice or are in a teaching position. But Diana birthed her sons, and her sons' announcements were signed appropriately by the doctors. Catherine birthed all three of her children, happy to use these royally approved physicians, and all three her children's announcements were appropriately signed. And then came Meghan Markle. From the very moment her pregnancy became known, it was surrounded with controversy. She appeared at Eugenie's wedding wearing a loose coat to make her look pregnant, even though, had she been pregnant, it could not have been larger than the size of a pea at the time. Then she went ahead and shared the happy news at the wedding, which is inappropriate for anyone to do, but even more so for the royals. From then on, it was an absolute circus. The bump would appear and disappear, would be bigger at 6 months than at 8 months in certain pictures, and wobbled awkwardly in others. Appeared in one picture to drop to Meghan's knees, and we saw her drop down on her haunches at nearly 9 months and get up unaided, etc., etc. However, I collected and compared many of these photographs, tagged them, etc., but once presented to someone in the law profession, I was told that none of it would stand up in a court of law because there can be many explanations. Women can be more bloated some days, the size of the bump can be influenced by the position of the baby, and the clothing and the angle of the camera. One of the many photographs, which, however, had us really scratching our heads, was one taken at a care facility where Meghan was wearing a tight white dress and in which the bump looked square. But it wasn't only the shape, but also the way the dress cut into her body, which was unnatural. However, my learned friend said that it could be argued that Meghan padded her bump to prevent people from bumping into it or touching it or whatever notion she had in her head. In short, we had to go about things in a different way to prove or disprove that Meghan birthed Archie herself. And with this, we immediately asked why Meghan Markle chose not to use the royal doctors, or men in grey suits, as she called them. They were, after all, the best of the best and highly acclaimed. Was it because she was just difficult or spiteful, or did she actually have something to hide? I think, more importantly, why wouldn't she choose the very doctors who could legally validate her son's birth? A group of doctors who were responsible for her husband's birth and the births of other royal children. I mean, why wouldn't she? It doesn't make sense. Then there was the whole guessing game of which hospital she will go to, and stories did the rounds that she would have a home birth. Many moons ago, I told a story about a game which was started between staff of St. Mary's and the Portland Hospital. That was something I portrayed as a story, and I told it as a fairy tale actually, but which I was in reality told as fact. Even reps and administrative staff took bets on which hospital Meghan would attend, with the favorite being the Portland. The story goes that when the news broke that Meghan gave birth, there was utter chaos and confusion at both hospitals, as there was none of the usual sightings of security hanging around in corridors, no sighting of an anxious or proud Prince Harry pacing a corridor, no black security vehicles in the parking lot. But even more puzzling was that there was no obstetrician or midwife signed in at the hospital at the supposed time of Archie's birth. The first midwife to come into the facility came in nearly 2 hours after his supposed birth. To date, no one has seen a heavily pregnant Meghan Markle come into the hospital or even caught a glimpse of her and Harry leaving the hospital with their baby. And when I say no one, I include cleaners and administrative staff. I promise you, I'm not the only person who tried to find an explanation for this. Did they drive into the covered parking area and brought her in via a back or side door? Likely. But that is not where the journey ends. There is a corridor to negotiate, all the way to a room or a theatre, and giving birth is rather messy. So someone must have helped and cleaned up. Yes, they could have left the same way. But aren't there papers and documents to be signed before you leave? So, what other possibilities are there? The only other possibility is that Archie was born somewhere else, elsewhere, like a private clinic. Because had he been born in another hospital, we would have known. The only plausible explanation would be a private clinic. But who assisted with the birth? First, it was said that Dr. Penelope Law was the obstetrician, but her husband very quickly put that rumor to rest with a tweet. When it appeared in Finding Freedom that Dr. Penelope Law was the obstetrician, I reached out to someone who reached out to someone else who confirmed that Dr. Law was indeed on leave and out of the country at the time. Of course, the Sussex camp quickly released that Dr. Gowrie Motha was actually the one attending. Well, unfortunately, Dr. Gowrie Motha has no privileges neither to teach or attend a patient at the Portland Hospital. That was very easy to find out. One phone call to the hospital solved that. And we did not even have to mention Archie or Meghan. All we did was call the hospital and ask whether Dr. Gowrie Motha worked at the hospital, as we heard about her wonderful work and how good the actual hospital was. That's it. So, who the heck assisted with Archie's birth? And who signed his proof of life certificate? Who? Someone must have done so. So, why should it be a secret? It is not private medical information, so there should be no reason for it to be kept secret. But should be and what is are actually two different things, especially when it comes to Meghan and Harry. So, where was Archie born? The only possibility remains a private clinic. But of course, I don't know which one or have any proof in terms of paperwork or copies of paperwork to prove this. None, absolutely none. And thus, from here on, I'm reverting back to stories I heard, and it is all speculation, so please do not go elsewhere and say bookworm said so and therefore it is so. No, I can think what I want and choose to believe certain things, but that does not make it true, okay? So I hope we are all on the same page here. Okay, so the stories I had been told is that Archie was born not 2 weeks late, but nearly a month early. And the reason for that was because Meghan jumped the gun with the sharing of her happy news, and that the first IVF resulted in a miscarriage, and then they had to wait a little over a month before trying again. So, the latest pregnancy would thus result in the baby being born a month to 6 weeks late. At first, Meghan hoped it would not be noticed, but she did not realize that everyone, including bookies, got in on the action where royal babies are concerned, and therefore they were faced with a problem. They tried to extend the birth date as much as they could, but when the supposed birth date was 2 weeks overdue, they realized that anyone who could count to 9 on their fingers were becoming suspicious. So the doctors were asked to induce. From gossip, speculation, and things I was told, doctors and the birth mother was against it, but finally gave in as the baby was at a healthy weight, at least enough to be born. However, there were allegedly complications, and at some point the baby was transferred from this private clinic to a hospital. And the very reason why there are people who believe that this is what happened was because shortly after Meghan supposedly returned home with a healthy baby, a child whose identity was kept from staff was submitted to a hospital and stayed there for at least 2 weeks after Archie was supposedly shown to the media. This child also had a rather strict security, and only a select few were allowed into the room where he was kept and treated. The only issue to date is that not only was the child just referred to as baby A, B, or C, or whatever, but nobody came to visit him until he was released. Only one person who was not staff ever came to see him, and she was not Meghan Markle. And the only description anyone can give of her is that she is European and has long hair. So, was this child Archie? I don't know, and neither does anyone that I know for sure. Now, a few years after the fact, people are coming out and saying that the first time they saw a live baby who was supposedly Archie, he looked at least a month older than he was supposed to be. And they are theorizing that Archie was not born on the 6th of May, but a couple of weeks earlier. But because there were complications, the Harkles decided to wait until he was out of the woods before announcing the birth. So there you have two very similar but slightly different scenarios, and maybe the truth lies somewhere in between. But the fact remains that to date it is still not known who witnessed his birth, and with that crucial element still uncertain, and particularly because Meghan has now lied twice about who the doctor was who helped birth Archie, it is obvious that there is something they are hiding. And there can only be two reasons why Meghan would lie or try to hide something. Firstly, because she did not birth Archie herself and used a surrogate. Or, secondly, there is something wrong with Archie. Or, I guess a third option would be both. Whatever the case, without the appropriate paperwork, Archie should not be in the line of succession. As you know, curiosity killed the cat, and I and some friends have narrowly missed getting into trouble by scratching where it doesn't itch. So we suspended our direct approach of asking questions of people who could get into trouble for answering them. It just isn't fair to have someone else pay the price for the Harkle's deceit. Having said that, and I think Paula M. had addressed the same thing before, when requesting copies of documentation from a State Department, you either get what you ask for or you are informed that the records are sealed for whatever reason. In the case of a child, it could be because of a closed adoption or whatever. In any case, the other option is that records do not exist, and your State Department will advise you one of these three options. They will either send you what you asked for, or they will say it doesn't exist, or they will tell you it is sealed. One of the three. And the fee that you pay for these copies are then also forfeited. They do not return it to you, okay? Well, in the case of Archie, the records were sealed, and as a matter of fact, are still sealed in the United Kingdom. And in the case of Lilibet, we were informed that the records do not exist in the state of California. In Archie's case, not only are his birth records sealed, but also his baptism records. In Lilibet's case, we have nowhere else to go as the state of California reckons the records do not exist for a Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor. However, I know Archie, at the very least, does exist, or the child known as Archie exists. And I'll be honest with you, I do not have the contacts in the United States like I do in the United Kingdom. And therefore, tips, gossip, truth, speculation, and everything else and in between came much easier when the Harkles still resided in the United Kingdom. And therefore, I can promise you that the child known as Archie does exist. Unfortunately, knowing that someone exists does not bring us any closer to knowing who he is. The proof I received that the child exists came from someone who could identify him on photographs, and I was told that the child in South Africa and the child Meghan carried sitting on that big bump could very well be the child they know as Archie, but unfortunately, they do not recognize him in many of the other photographs and are of the opinion that Meghan is still playing games with other children and or Photoshop. There are also those who are of the opinion that Archie may have Harry's DNA but not Meghan's, or possibly neither Harry's nor Meghan's. The reason why many believe that Archie was not created from Meghan's eggs is based on medical assumptions. It is known that Meghan had her eggs frozen in Toronto after her divorce from Trevor. Now, that in itself is not unusual, and many women who divorce in their 30s may do this. However, that was at least 5 years before Archie was conceived. Now, having your eggs frozen and hoping for a live birth in the future is not as simple as it sounds. The highest live birth rates from previously frozen eggs are shown to come from women who undergo the procedure before the age of 30. However, most women have their eggs frozen when in their 30s. In Meghan's case, and if we accept that she is her true age, she must have been about 32, 33 when she had her eggs frozen. There is, however, much to be said for storing your eggs in your 30s instead of in your 20s, because in your 20s, you may not be ready or need them as yet, or even know for sure that you may need them in the future. And as it stands, you can only store your eggs for 10 years. And no matter at what age you decide to do this, if a 30 to 34-year-old woman wants a 75% chance of a live birth, she needs to store at least 10 eggs. A woman of 37 would need to freeze at least 20 eggs for the same 75% result. So let's assume Meghan was 32, 33 at the time, and she had 10 to 15 eggs frozen. That would not mean that she had all of those available to her, as eggs are lost throughout the process. Some of the eggs may be immature, some may not freeze or thaw correctly, may not fertilize, or may not even reach the stage suitable for implantation. At the end of the procedure, there may be so little as 4 or 5 embryos from which to attempt conception. The birth rate with previously frozen eggs per embryo transfer is around 19%. However, this is not where it ends. The age of the woman when the transfer or implant takes place also impacts the success rate. And older women, particularly those older than 36, have a lower rate of success and would be at a much higher risk of complications during pregnancy. It is thus my learned friend's opinion that it would have been less risky and much cheaper for Meghan to have had the frozen eggs destroyed and to start the extraction procedure all over with fresh eggs in the United Kingdom, a procedure which would likely have had to start months before the wedding to have had a successful IVF procedure so soon after the wedding. At the age of 37, Meghan would have had a 50% chance of a successful IVF procedure, and therefore it may have taken more than one or even a couple of attempts before she herself would get pregnant from IVF. It is thus my learned friend's opinion that it is very likely that Harry and Meghan chose a surrogate because they did not have the time in their hectic lives to go through these repeated procedures themselves, as it could take a lot of time and often bring sad disappointment. Okay, so where are we now? Unfortunately, still only with maybes, speculation, gossip, statistics, and although it is stacking up, it is still not enough to take to a fight. And that is not me, but the law and my learned friends talking. But does that mean it is the end of the road and we should just accept that we'll be lied to or held in the dark for the rest of our lives? No. A subscriber with a very sharp eye sent me this a while ago. According to a poster, someone investigated and could not find a passport for Archie. Now, I know in some countries a child can travel on the parent's passport until the age of 2, but in South Africa and Britain, this is not the case. In South Africa, a child entering and exiting the country must have a passport and an extended birth certificate. And as we know, Harry and Meghan supposedly brought the child known as Archie to South Africa. And believe me, you may have seen a few distant photographs of them arriving in South Africa and thought that they were received like kings and queens. But no, I can almost guarantee you that even though they may have received VIP treatment, very few of these officials knew who they were or really cared. They or their assistants would have had to pull out their paperwork even if they were given VIP treatment and did not have to queue up to do so. Now understand this. Someone like me cannot track a passport or visa. You need to be someone in foreign affairs or homeland affairs or customs to do that. Or someone with influence and money who knows someone in those environments. But if this is true or has any merit, then how did Archie travel from one country to the next? Did he perhaps travel on the name his biological mother or the surrogate mother gave him? Or has he never left the United Kingdom at all? Okay, guys, this is a very long video, at least for me, and it is not finished yet because, believe it or not, there is more. And if you think this is hectic, it gets better. But I truly cannot take this further today. Certain complications arose during the course of the day, but I'll tell you about that in the next video. So, my dears, until we meet again on the next one, as always, take good care of yourselves. Bye.